Hello, travelers. Welcome to Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens. My name is Tim, and this week, together with Citi's E for Education campaign, we're going on a unique journey to explore how global citizens can put that valuable skill set to work as part of a global career. Over the course of 5 days, we'll be connecting with Citi employees in 9 financial capitals across 6 continents. They have generously agreed to share their stories, observations, and tips for finding success in this highly interconnected global economy. For a complete listing of upcoming Citi Global Career Journey live stream events, check out athome.reachtheworld.org. Today, we're getting the Citi Global Career Journey started with Brant Portugal in London, England. Brant has a long job title. He's co-head of Western Europe Corporate Sales and Solutions, Rates and FX, and he's going to tell us what FX means. And he's a managing director at Citi. And he's joining us today to talk about working, living, and thriving professionally in London. But before we meet Brant, I want to welcome the teachers, students, Reach the World travelers, and early career professionals who are watching this live stream today. Please use the YouTube chat bar to let us know you're here, where you're joining from, and of course, to share any questions you have for our guest as we go. We'll get to as many questions as we can in the next 45 minutes or so. And with that, let's get underway. Brant, welcome to Reach the World.
Great, thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for joining us. For our conversation, or the conversation part of this event, I wanted to sort of touch on 3 topics, and I'm going to be asking your colleagues in other markets these same 3 questions.
Great.
So we can compare your answers side to side and give our viewers a good opportunity to compare what it's like to live and work in different countries. So topic number 1, I want to talk first about you and your global career path. So maybe you can start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to be, how you sort of like walked the path of global citizenship to become what you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to share that background. Before I dive into that background, I guess I will define foreign exchange, or FX, just because there might be a lot of acronyms or abbreviations that are used in markets, and it's important to make sure we understand what we do. And this acronym of FX is probably the most important of all markets related acronyms that you may hear, an abbreviation for foreign exchange, because you need currency to be able to travel. If you live in the US, you need Great British pounds in order to live and to invest in the UK. And so what I do on a day-to-day basis is help global companies who operate in various countries access the currency markets, which is the largest, most liquid market in the world across asset classes. So that's a basic definition of FX. It's a buy or sell of one currency in exchange for the other. It's used by corporations, hedge funds, asset managers, and travelers like yourself who are either visiting or living abroad. So that's FX in a nutshell. But so how did I get on this journey of FX? It wouldn't seem like an obvious transition if you had asked me when I was 16 years old. I think my first real major international trip was a surfing trip to Costa Rica. I was living in the Northeast and it was really cold. And I decided that, I wanted to pick up surfing because I thought it looked cool. And I fell in love with the sport. And I saved money and ultimately went to Costa Rica and did a 10-day surf camp. And that really sparked within me this travel bug and this wanting to understand different cultures and different locations and really different foods, because I do love food. My first job actually was very early days. I mean, as soon as I could get working papers, I did, because I just had this desire to travel after my first trip to Costa Rica. And so I was actually working in a pizza shop cleaning dishes, and I was surrounded by a lot of different ethnicities, which was a good initial exposure to culture. Then I worked at a pharmacy. So I won't go through every single job that I've had, but my journey with the travel and my journey with culture started from a time when, it may not have seemed obvious given the areas that I was growing up in and the roles that I had at that time. But I went to University of Richmond in Virginia, had a wonderful studying experience there, and I studied biology with a minor in Spanish. And I decided my junior year I wanted to study abroad, and that was one of the most formative life decisions I've made, was making that step into international study. I absolutely loved Spain. I was paired up with a great host family. I had some of the best food in the world. I lived 15 minutes walk to the beach. And yes, I did learn a few things while I was there, but it was really just that access to continental Europe that really sparked my attention and interest in travel. While I was there, this was my junior year, I didn't want to go home for the summer because I was just loving living abroad so much. And I ended up getting a job working with my career development center at a health insurance company called Cigna. I worked in their finance department. And this was the first time I actually got exposure to real finance, which is my chosen career path because I was a biology major at the time. And so you thought, well, why did a biology major go into the world of finance? And I answered that question about 100 times in different interviews with all the different companies that I chose. But anyway, there's actually a lot of similarity between the science background and what we do in markets, or what I did, which was investment banking when I started my career. After my days at University of Richmond and that study abroad summer within finance, I got really interested in banking and the finance behind how companies operate. Ended up, after many interviews and much support from the alumni network, getting a job at Goldman Sachs and investment banking. Did that, plus moved into equities and then did fixed income before later joining Citi in 2006. And this was in New York. And so I had a wonderful time in New York. I think it's one of the most exciting, vibrant cities in the world. And we're not here to talk about New York, but it is a wonderful place to live. And where I got exposed to, again, a lot of different cultures and values and traits and customs that I hadn't been exposed to growing up in a smaller suburban town. So I was at Citibank in foreign exchange from 2006 to roughly 2011, working in New York corporate FX sales, covering companies throughout the U.S., from West Coast tech to industrials in the Midwest to a lot of pharma companies on the East Coast. Had an amazing experience, and about the time right around 2011, I decided that it was important to expand my skill set. Ended up doing an executive MBA through Duke University, and this program was very unique. It was called their Global Executive Program, and the way the program operated was it had 50 participants from many different countries, and so it was a virtual learning program. Well before virtual learning got really exciting and it became a part of our day-to-day life as we have now. So we would get together for 2 weeks, a week in each city, every 2.5 months. And in the meantime, we would do virtual classes with the professors. And this was quite an interesting, unique idea at the time, which is nearly a decade ago. And it was an amazing time. And I traveled to some incredible places. And after I graduated, I knew I wanted to get a career internationally outside of New York, although I felt like New York was diverse enough from my hometown to get that exposure. But anyway, I had just had conversations with my boss at the time, and I applied for a job as the head of corporate sales for FX in Japan. It was amazing. I lived there for 4 years. Talk about a cultural difference that was very different going from New York to Tokyo. Had a wonderful time covering, managing a sales team and really understanding what motivates people in different cultures, what is the different incentive mechanisms, the different recognition mechanisms, like how do people feel part of something. And it was very different than what I had thought going into it, and I really enjoyed it. So I spent 4 years in Japan. I was part of an Asia management team, so I got a lot of exposure to different Asian cultures and the way companies operate. And after 4 years, it was just time to move on to a new challenge. And so I was fortunate enough to move into London corporate sales, covering clients just based within the UK, Ireland, Benelux, and Nordics. And over the past 4 years, my role has expanded to be co-head of Western Europe corporate sales and solution. My co-head primarily focuses on rates business, and I primarily focus on FX. It's been quite a journey, and currency markets it's the most international you can possibly get, because whether it's a micro event within a company that is driving a chain reaction of its competitors, or whether it's a exporter-led selling opportunity, or just a broader risk management theme. There's so much going on in foreign exchange, and so much going on in Europe in particular around currencies, that this is the most exciting place to do foreign exchange is based in London, or based in Europe in general, but in London very specifically. So that's been a bit about my career journey. I'll pause there because I've been speaking for a while, but I wanted to give the comprehensive view of where I came from to where we are today.
Yeah, fantastic. What an interesting career path. It's really cool to hear that you have gone, worked in multiple global markets, and that, this may have all started from a really impactful study abroad experience, like a lot of our travelers are, participating in as Reach the World travelers, and how that can sort of influence a whole career. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to move on to topic 2, which is specific to the city and the market that you work in, London, England. It sounds like over the course of your career, you've really had to develop some intercultural skills and understanding to help you succeed in several marketplaces, it sounds like, where understanding the way the local office place works and the dynamics is really important to your success. So first of all, what do you like about living and working in London? You touched on that a little bit already. And second of all, what do you need to know or be good at in order to be successful in the London market?
Sure. So first, I'm going to tell you a secret, which is that the weather in London is not bad. Like everyone says, oh, it rains every day, it's going to be terrible, how are you ever going to live in London? Let me be clear, and maybe the Londoners will be upset with me disclosing the secret. The weather is actually, I think, pretty mild and pleasant. I mean, there are certainly more days of gray than not, but it feels like London in the summer is so beautiful, because you don't have the extremely hot in the summer and you don't have the extremely cold in the winter. And I think it's a wonderful place to live, actually, for the weather, which I find to be quite mild. I mean, you can play golf and tennis year round, which you can't do in New York, which is unfortunate, but gladly I'm able to do that here in my day-to-day life. So that's a secret that I'll let you in on about London. In terms of what I can do, or what I have done or learned around cultural sensitivities and being what is unique about London, I think as international of a city as New York is, you feel the internationalness of London in a much more real way. Whereas I think in New York, there's a constant drive towards assimilation, certainly, of course, like respect for our own cultures, but there's also like a New York way of doing things, a New York mindset, a New York culture, a New York intensity. Whereas in London, there's so much difference even within continental Europe, and there's such a high presence of people from continental Europe that London really feels like you walk down the street and you just hear 10 different languages on every block, which I find so fascinating. And the food, which again may have been criticized in the past, you have really good non-British food as well as good British food, but really good European food based in London because it's so close. Look, I think London by and large is the most international city that I've lived in, or most international city I've ever visited. And you feel that, and you notice the culture a lot more, which I find really exciting. So unless you had a different question, then I could maybe go into a bit about, some of my learnings along the way of
no, that's perfect. Just to warn you, I'm going to be talking with your colleagues in New York later this week, so we'll get their response to that. You've set a bar that they'll have to respond to, but yeah, no, go ahead. I'm curious, sort of just as maybe a starter. I hear a noise in the background, like a buzzing sound that I think anyone who's been in school recently, like my immediate thought is that it's like the bell you hear between classes, but I don't think that's probably what that means in your specific office environment.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have so many noises going on at any point in time. There can be beeps or buzzers or rings, and they all mean different things. So I could take a whole call up explaining each of these different meanings, but no, look, to be in a sales and trading environment, I'm sure you'll hear this on future calls, you have to be curious about markets, and you have to be able to multitask, because I'm sitting now in front of me with 4 big screens, and there are probably 50 different chats going with Bloomberg that I'm watching, not all actively participating, but that I'm trying to monitor. And then I have bilateral chats on internal message platforms. And then I've got emails coming in a mile a minute. So it's just, it's a constant engagement and constant stimulation. And that's why I love the markets. And that's true whether you work in New York or London or Tokyo. It's this constant energy, this constant information flow that's coming. And the most successful people are able to quickly pick out what is relevant and what is not, and prioritize that as relevant and deprioritize that which is not. I think what I've learned that is unique to my international experiences, or what I would say come to recognize and come to incorporate into my own style, is that you throw any assumptions you have out the door, and make sure that you're really tuned into people in different cultures. And I think that's such an important thing, because when I was living in Japan, for example, I didn't speak Japanese. Of course, I had learned the basics of Japanese, but I couldn't converse fluently. So I had to rely a lot on nonverbal communication, and you pick up a lot from that. And it takes time to understand the differences between the verbal cues and the nonverbal cues, and in different cultures. But I think an investment in really paying attention and learning what are the cultural drivers, what are the ways in which a person may feel comfortable saying yes or no, or be slightly pessimistic or optimistic based on cultural values. I think that's a really important thing as well. And so I would say a learning of having lived an international career is the nonverbal, right? So making sure you're aware of nonverbal cues and able to adapt accordingly. The second is around flexibility. And flexibility is really important, because different people like to be managed in different ways. And as a leader within a business, I think it's one of the most important things to be able to identify what motivates someone. And some people, it's very different. It could be money, it could be recognition, it could be a sense of purpose, it could be, a team chemistry, it could be intellectual curiosity. And you have to figure out what motivates people and try to give them more opportunities for the things that they enjoy doing. And to the extent that you can, deprioritize things that they don't. Now, everyone has aspects of work that they don't enjoy and that need to get done. And that's part of being in a team and part of being, part of an organization. However, as a manager, if you can recognize the way in which people feel good about what they do and recognize the way in which they're motivated, then you're more likely to create a happier working environment, and happiness leads to productivity. So those are two of the main things I think that I've picked up on over time, and in the different international locations, that perhaps I wouldn't have been as aware of had I just stayed in one city throughout my career.
All right. Well, you mentioned really briefly the language component, which I had a note I wanted to ask you about, because you, I would assume, communicate regularly with people throughout Western Europe, which comprises, many different languages. How do you deal with language specifically? It sounds like in Japan you learned, basic conversational Japanese so that you could, show respect for Japanese culture and, demonstrate that you were fitting in that way within that market. Do you know the same for most of the languages of Western Europe?
I wish I did. That would certainly have been very helpful. But I think so no is the short answer. I know some conversational Spanish since I lived there, but I don't even use that on a day-to-day basis. I think most clients are used to conversing in English with an American bank if they're dealing with someone who's not their day-to-day coverage. If they're dealing with someone who's their day-to-day coverage, they may prefer to speak in the local language. But it certainly would help if I spoke the language, but over time, you just have to build a rapport with your team and build a rapport with certain clients and figure out the right ways to motivate them. From a client's perspective, I think a client would always take someone with clever ideas over someone who could communicate it most perfectly, right? And so if my sales team is not a native speaker in the language of the client they're covering, but they have the best ideas, that's a win, right? And I think clients would even take that. So yeah, and ultimately we deal with good people in this business, and good people recognize that there's an effort being made. And so I imagine my sales team, when they're speaking to clients when they don't speak their language, they're still trying to understand their culture and trying to understand what sports they care about, or the different schooling systems that they may be exposed to, and find ways to relate. It is a people business.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I would like to move on to sort of the last topic that we were going to discuss. You touched a little bit on some great global career advice. Our audience today is a lot of young career professionals, young people who have had wonderful study abroad experiences and are starting to consider, adding a global element to their career path. If you could speak to like yourself when you were 20, what advice would you give yourself, or what advice would you give this audience for things that they could do today to make themselves more competitive in a global marketplace?
I thought of 3 pieces of advice. One was around networking, the second is around passion, and third is being like intellectual curious. And when it comes to networking, and they're all kind of actually linked together, but networking is what you need to be doing as throughout your life, but also really in the early days of your career. This is so important. And the reason I think networking is so important is because until you actually work in a job, you're not going to know how successful or not you're going to be. And you all are probably very bright, ambitious, motivated, global citizens, and could do most jobs that exist. But the key challenge for you is to spend enough time with people asking good questions and figuring out how likely you are to be better than average at a particular job, right? To be good at a job or be exceptional at a job. The sooner you figure that out in life, the better off you'll be and the happier you'll be. Right. So start with a lot of networking, and that networking is from, don't be afraid, right? I mean, the worst someone can say is no, and then you're in no worse shape. So you can, ask your, the students that you work with, that you're, studying with, or family friends or friends of friends. Would they spend 15 minutes explaining what they do and why they like it? Right? What don't they like? And then see how you'd really fit in there. And don't go for the thing that is the topic of the day, the most, sexy asset class, or the, most demanding career field. Because if money is a motivation, which it is for a lot of people, like, find the thing that you're best at, and eventually you will find a way to commercialize it, right? And I think that's really important. I think that comes from really good networking. The second point around the finding a passion or finding what you're better than average at comes from the networking, right? And you have to be self-critical. Right? You've gone to good schools, you've had unique life experiences, you've challenged yourself in different ways, but you have to be honest about what you're good at and what are the areas you can improve. And you have to be self-critical, especially early on, because you don't want to, if you're not the most, let's say, I don't know, quantitative person, you don't want to find yourself in doing coding all the time. You're simply not going to enjoy it, and you're never going to feel fulfilled, even if that is like the thing you're supposed to be doing that is really unique and exciting at the moment, right? Because in 5 years time, 10 years time, maybe it's not. Right? And so again, identifying something within you that you feel you're particularly good at, and then focusing on that, I think will give you more reward and satisfaction, short-term and long-term. And the third is around like intellectual curiosity. Whatever field you pursue, asking good questions is important, especially at a young age or an early stage in your career. And when I mean asking good questions, it's not just why do you do this? You know, you really have to think through and understand what people are saying, and see how that fits into something bigger and relate it to yourself. And so it's using the small questions to see the big picture. I think that's where I see perhaps a gap between some of the lesser experienced people coming through the desk who, you know, some people are just better at it than others, and like understanding what questions to ask, understanding how to identify an opportunity. And you really have, it certainly can come naturally to other people, but it can also be learned. Like asking the questions that are going to get to the result that you want and give you the information you need to make a better decision. Like, this is all really important. So again, establishing the connections, creating a network, making sure that within that network you have people who can give you information, but also information that you can provide to that network, because it's not just a one-way street. So there'll be people like you who in a few years' time will be benefiting from your experience, and you have to give back. That's important, right? So what you've taken from people, you need to find a way to reinvest. That's the way the world works. Find people in your network that are, you know, your same level and maybe one level above or two levels above in terms of experience, so that you have the ability to create a path ahead of you. That's important. You know, you don't need to network with a CEO if you're just starting on day one, but you need to find someone who maybe you can see yourself being in 5-10 years time. And then again, utilizing all these experiences to make sure you're being self-critical, reflecting, collecting feedback, so you can decide how you're going to progress. That's, again, super important. And you can do that best by asking good questions. So those are the three things that I think are really important to pass on to people of your experience level. Hopefully that's valuable.
Yeah, thank you. That's incredibly valuable advice. Thank you very much. Let's slide right into the Q&A, because I see we've got a really great group of people joining us on the live stream. I'd like to encourage you. I'm going to give our on-camera participant a chance to ask a question first, but anyone who is watching via the live stream right now, please drop your questions for Brant in the chat bar and I will pass them along. But I'm going to bring in Soren. Hey, Soren.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Go ahead. You got a question for Brant?
Yeah, so a question for you, Brant, is thank you for all the advice, and it was interesting to hear just about your journey with Citi and everything. And kind of a big question I have is how you decided to move to Tokyo and then to London. Like, I understand it was for the job, but how did you decide when to do this? Or how did you decide when was the right time to make that kind of dramatic switch in your career? Was it motivation from a certain position, or did you actually want to move to London to try something new? And kind of what was your decision making in that?
And thanks for the question, Soren. I had never been to Asia when I was presented with the opportunity about working in Tokyo. So my first trip was actually to Tokyo as part of an interview process. And also for me to see if I could live there and be happy and productive. I just knew that I wanted a challenge, and I wanted a challenge outside of the US in a management role. And then look, some of it comes down to luck and timing, where if you have the right network and you have people who are looking out for you and you are proactive, then you'll know what's available, the landscape, and you have to apply, and some things will turn out well. And as I started talking to people about the experience in Japan, you know, I actually had a mentor from my previous role who lived in Japan during the late 90s. And you know, he was like, you have to do this. This is transformative. This is the best place you could get stationed personally and professionally. And in a lot of ways, he was right. So I would say I didn't know from an early age that I wanted to go to Japan. What I knew was that there's certain things in that stage in my career that I wanted to see happen. And one of which was expanding my horizon and applying what I had learned in New York to a different market. And then once I was there in Japan, I had done it for 4 years, and I had groomed a good successor. I had a solid succession plan, and I was ready to move on to my own next challenge. I would have been happy to go back to New York after that, but as a foreign exchange professional, if you have the opportunity to work in London, London is the center of everything that happens in FX. It's the most active market and the most active time of day, and we have some of the most sophisticated clients based here in Europe as well. I mean, we have globally sophisticated companies that we deal with, but the nature of corporates in Europe, because they have a smaller domestic market, means their mindset has to shift outside their borders sooner than, say, a US company that can grow domestically for a long time before they reach a scale and need to penetrate market outside of their home territory. But so anyway, I left Tokyo because it had been 4 years. I had a successor, everything lined up, and then there was a great opportunity in London to grow and develop. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like you kind of saw the opportunity and were up for the challenge and decided to go for that risk. And in the end, it was a wonderful decision, and ended up doing it again, going to London. So it's cool to hear that you've had success with that.
And absolutely. And I think any job process takes a long time. If you decide now that you want to do something different, it's not going to be an overnight process, right? There are applications, there are visas, there are interviews. So the best thing you can be doing is constantly thinking ahead 6 months to 1 year to 2 years, and not ever putting your manager in a situation where you wake up one day and living in Tokyo and say, I need to get out tomorrow, because it's just not realistic to do. It's a process. And so, I was probably ready to leave Japan after 3.5 years. And it was a 6-month process to find a new role, and or maybe even longer than 6 months. There was a process and timeline, and you have to have a good communication with your manager and with your family as to how you're thinking about relocating and why you're thinking about it, and try to work towards a mutually agreeable timeline.
Yeah, fantastic question, Soren. Thank you very much. If you have another one, I want to come back to you in a little bit. But I'm going to take a question that we got from our online audience that I think sort of plays into that great question, Soren. And that is, what is the actual, Brent, this is a perfect question for you because you've moved to some very different markets. What is the actual process for getting a work visa? If you're in the United States, you don't need to get into the details, but if you were someone who really wanted to work abroad, is it hard to get a visa to work abroad? Is it hard to move your whole life to another country? What are the challenges and what are the rewards?
I think perhaps before answering the application specific question, I should say that it's never easy moving countries, let alone cities, cities, let alone countries. I find that physically moving is one of the most disruptive life experiences you can have. And it manifests, or that disruption manifests itself in different ways. It could be additional stress. It could be, just administrative things you need to deal with. But it is cumbersome to move houses, let alone move to different countries. And there are a lot of things involved with that, because it's not just getting the visa permit. Then you've got to get the insurance, and you've got to set up a tax plan, and you've got to learn the rules and regulations and take a securities exam. And the list goes on and on of things that you need to do, which can be a deterrent for some people. But the city, fortunately, has always been supportive in the way that they provide guidance and make the process relatively clear, and try to minimize that burden during the process of relocating. But it's a lot. You have to explain, I'd explain to my family in New York while I was moving, 14-hour time zones difference away, right? And it's not easy to do that when you have, living grandparents and great uncles and great aunts that, that want to enjoy time with you. But in terms of getting a visa, to go back to part of the original question, I think that where there's a will, there's a way. I think that's always been my mindset, that you can make anything happen if you put your mind to it. And so I would never let that be a deterrent. There are obviously certain restrictions that are difficult to overcome, but you have to prioritize the things. Like maybe you can't go to one country that you're most interested in, but maybe you have to go to the second, and you make the most of that. Right? In life, you have a choice every day. You wake up, you choose to be happy, right? And it may not be your top choice of where you are or where you're living, but you try to take the most optimistic view of the opportunities you're given.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Soren, I'll come back to you after I share one more question from our online audience. So you studied abroad in Spain, Brant, and a lot of people who are in our audience who have recently come off of study abroad experiences dream of going back. You know, they had such a great study abroad experience, they want to go back to. Did you ever want to like go back and live and work in Spain, or like how did, I know you had your route took you a different way, you know, this unexpected turn to Tokyo, but have you ever wanted to go back and work in Spain and relive that experience?
Well, I'm very fortunate now that, you know, my remit or responsibility includes Spain. So I have a natural reason to go back and to, you know, relive some of the experiences I had while I was living in Madrid and also Valencia. I think I wouldn't see myself living in Spain long term, but I'm so fortunate and happy that I have the opportunity to do that. And I think it's fine. I think it's great for people who've studied abroad to go back and live where they studied, because each life chapter brings you new challenges as well as new positive experiences. And so your student experience will probably be much different than your young professional experience, as it would be much different from your family experience. And so, yeah, I think there's a time for everything. And going back to a place that you know and love, I would always encourage people to do that.
All right, yeah, that's a fantastic point. It's probably worth clarifying too for our North American audience members that having a global career doesn't necessarily mean living abroad. You can definitely have a global career within North America as well. And we'll be talking with the New York market later this week. But living abroad is certainly cool, and Brent is providing a great perspective on that.
Actually, I would jump in there for a second. Sorry to cut you off and say that I think increasingly, because there can be challenges with visas, or there can be challenges with relocating families, and you know, concerns that you know, that limit someone's ability to move easily, right? And increasingly, this digital era is giving us the opportunity to expand and break down our borders, but remain in your same location. So again, it's up to you to drive your career. It's up to you to own your progression. And it's important that you don't think, oh, I have to move to a different country to get a different experience. Like, there are jobs that give you international exposure. There are projects that you can work on that are international in nature. You can volunteer with an international charity. So again, you can, you know, in life, you spend time, you have to find ways to spend time that you really enjoy. And not everything's going to be your top choice, but it may be close to that top choice given the options that you have at the time.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Soren, I'll bring you back if you have another question. You want to let us know? You got another question for Brant?
Yeah,
or are you good?
I have a kind of a quick question. So you talked a lot about networking and how it's important, especially for young professionals like us. If someone wanted to go about networking with you, what would be kind of the best approach to doing so? Would that be a message on LinkedIn? Would it be a simple set of questions on LinkedIn? Kind of, what would be the best way to get someone's attention that's been in a position like you for 15, 20 years to actually start that conversation and potentially lead to a call or something like that?
Yeah, I think you would have to. So look, I just spend a lot of time advising people who are just out of university or rising seniors, and I do that primarily through my alma mater, either through University of Richmond or Duke University. So I do spend a lot of time doing that. So for me to take time away from that to talk to people who are slightly outside of that circle, like that takes a little bit more effort on behalf of the person who's reaching out to me, simply because, you know, we all have limited amounts of time, but I would always be happy to support Reach the World people. So I'm happy to do that. But I think the way to initiate dialogue is to just be authentic, right? And say, I'm interested in a career in this space, or there's something about your background that interests me. Can I take 15 minutes to tell you why it interests me and see if you can answer a few questions for me, right? I think you don't need to overcomplicate things. You need to be polite. You need to be, you know, proper, and you need to be prepared when you have these discussions. But and you need to be comfortable with being rejected. That's all it takes. And if someone doesn't respond, that's okay, right? Because there's someone else around. Or, you know, sometimes what I do is if someone's reaching out to me who I don't have a connection, or I don't see an obvious connection with, then I'll ask someone else who I know to speak with them instead. And I think most people try to be helpful, especially at Citi. Like Citi is very good and very approachable for that. So, but yeah, again, it comes down to when you're thinking about your network, and think of it as concentric circles, and the core circle is your peers and the people who are like, and it's one degree removed from you, and then it's 2 degrees and so on. And the farther you get from that core, the least likely you are to have a successful engagement. But it also may be the least relevant to your immediate need. So it's balancing those concentric circles and balancing the need to have engagement with those stakeholders.
That's a great question, Soren. I think a lot of young people have the same question. It sort of like reminds me of what Brant said earlier about reaching out to people who are like 3, 4, 5 years ahead of you and where you want to be, and touching base with them as sort of the next progressive step in your career. I think
I would say that, just going back more specifically to your question, yes, LinkedIn message works, right? If you don't have someone's Citi email or their mobile phone, to say, hey, I noticed you posted this on LinkedIn. Would you have a few minutes to explain to me? I'm an aspiring, you know, such and such, and I would love your perspective. Would you be willing to do that? Right? It's finding some little connection and then using it to position for a proper conversation. That's part of, you know, being a salesperson, or part of being someone who's trying to network, but being authentic about it. It's key. Like, you need something, right? And that there's no need to hide that. That's okay. But that's how life operates. And I always say to people who ask me to network, I always say, well, yes, I'm happy to do this, but you need to then give back to someone else as well, right? Or give back to 2 people, right? And try to create the spirit of being helpful to people who you don't know as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Brant. That's such great advice. Soren, thank you for the great questions. Really appreciate it. We're coming up to the end. Oh, you know what? I see one more question online that I want to pass along to you, Brant. Stephen in the chat is asking, what would you recommend students curious in the market do when applying to a new field? For example, political science students, you know, maybe interested in exploring business as a career, something you did successfully, Brant. What would you recommend to when you're making a little bit of a leap in subject focus?
Yeah, I think you need to find the biggest skeptics, seek them out, and then prepare to defend against them. So there were certain, you know, finance professors that obviously wanted to look after the finance students to get jobs in finance. Totally natural. I looked at that as my biggest challenge, is like, how do I convince this finance teacher that someone studying biology could be equally suited or almost as well suited to do this job after a few months? Because in the end, yes, you learn a lot in university, but you learn even more on the job. And so it's about your ability to learn and your work ethic. And I would run through a brick wall if, you know, my boss asked me to do it. And it's just, you have to be willing to make that commitment if you're really changing outside of your discipline. Aside from that, it really comes down to networking, watching YouTube videos, you know, going through prep courses, asking someone if you could come in and shadow for an afternoon. Obviously now in this environment, it's a little bit different, but during normal environments, shadowing was a great way to do it. I did that pretty regularly just to make sure I was making an informed choice. And you really never know until you're sat next to someone and you see what they're doing. Like, I could never look at Excel spreadsheets all day. If you have to see that to believe that. But I liked Excel spreadsheets, so it was fine, right? Or I could never have this many blinking lights going all the time. You have to sit down with someone to see those blinking lights, to see how your body reacts and how you feel. Or if as someone in sales or someone in markets, you're on the phone, whether you're a trader or a salesperson, pretty much all day, and you have to be able to maintain that energy level or maintain that connectivity throughout the day. And you have to see it and feel it to make sure you're going to be successful.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for that wonderful question. Brant, thanks for the amazing response. Brant, thank you also for sharing your time and your global career journey with Reach the World today. We're right at the end of our time that we have slotted for this event. I want to thank also Soren. Thank you so much for your great on-camera questions, and to our live stream audience for adding a couple questions in there today as well. This is just the first of many stops on our Citi Global Career Journey this week. How does living and working in Sao Paulo, Singapore, Sydney, or Seoul compare to what we just learned from Brant? I'll be asking Citi employees in those cities the same questions in the coming days, so we can make head-to-head comparisons and you can take the next steps on your personal global career journey. So special thanks to the Citi E4Education campaign, all of our Citi volunteers, especially Brant today. Thank you so much for making this experience possible. You can see the full lineup of upcoming events at athome.reachtheworld.org. We're off to Tel Aviv, Israel next, so I hope to see you all there. Thanks, everyone.